Welcome, dear wanderer of the twilight hours. Welcome to this gentle space between waking and sleeping, where stories flow like underground rivers, carrying us through the chambers of ancient memory. Tonight, we embark upon a journey that will last through the turning of the stars, through the deep hours when the world above grows quiet and still, and the realms below begin to whisper their eternal secrets. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight, whether you rest beneath northern stars or southern skies, in cities that never sleep or countryside where darkness holds dominion. Wherever you are, know that you are joining a tradition as old as humanity itself. The tradition of telling stories in the darkness, of weaving myths to carry us through the night. Here on Boring Mythology, we speak in the old way, the slow way, where stories unfold like flowers opening in moonlight, petal by petal, layer by layer. Tonight's journey will take us through 7 great underworlds, 7 visions of what lies beneath the surface of the living earth. We will descend through doorways that have been imagined by countless generations, painted on cave walls, carved into temple stones, whispered around dying fires. These are not separate stories, but one story, told in 7 languages, dreamed in 7 cultures, but speaking always of the same great mystery, what lies beyond, what lies beneath, what waits in the darkness that cradles all life. Feel now how the ordinary world begins to fade. The sounds of day, traffic perhaps, or wind in trees, or the settling of your home. These sounds grow distant, muffled, as though heard through layers of earth and stone. Your breathing deepens, slows. The weight of your body increases, becomes heavier, more present, as though gravity itself has strengthened its ancient embrace. This is how all underworld journeys begin, not with dramatics or fanfare, but with this subtle shift, this gentle turning away from the bright world above. First, we will walk the marble halls and shadow valleys of the Greek underworld, that vast kingdom ruled by the stern and just Hades, where the river Styx winds its way between the lands of the living and the dead, where Cerberus keeps his endless watch, where heroes have ventured and gods have wept. We will trace the paths that Orpheus walked in his desperate love, that Persephone travels in her eternal cycle, that every soul must eventually traverse. Then, as one realm dissolves into another like smoke into mist, we will find ourselves in the frozen reaches of Helheim, the Norse realm of the dishonored dead, where Hel herself presides, half living, half corpse, ruler of 9 worlds, below the world tree. Here, the cold is not just temperature, but a quality of existence itself, where the bridge Gjallarbru trembles under the weight of the living, where the dog Garmr howls at the gates, where even the gods fear to tread without purpose. From ice, we transition to the flowing darkness of the Egyptian Duat, that mysterious realm through which Ra sails each night in his solar bark, battling the serpent Apophis, dying and being reborn with each dawn. Here, we will witness the weighing of hearts against feathers, the transformation of souls into birds and stars, the endless halls where Osiris sits in green-skinned judgment, where every wall bears the inscriptions of 1,000 spells for navigation through the afterlife. Our path will then lead us into Yomi, the Japanese land of shadow and pollution, where Izanami dwells in her palace of decay, where the dead feast on darkness, where the boundaries between death and defilement blur into one another like ink spreading through water. This is the realm that even the creator gods abandoned, the place of ultimate separation, where the living who enter can never fully return unchanged. As the journey deepens, we will cross into the Celtic Otherworld, that paradoxical realm that exists alongside our own, separated by the thinnest of veils. Sometimes a morning mist, sometimes a hill that opens only on certain nights, sometimes simply the surface of still water. Here, time moves in spirals rather than lines, where the Sídhe hold their eternal courts, where mortals might feast for what seems like hours only to return and find centuries have passed, or live for years, only to discover that in their own world, not a single night has gone by. Deeper still, we descend into Irkalla, the great city below of Mesopotamian vision, where Ereshkigal rules from her palace of lapis lazuli and dust, where the dead eat clay and drink muddy water, where Inanna once descended and was hung upon a hook like meat, where the most ancient laws of death were first inscribed in cuneiform upon tablets that predate even memory. And finally, in the deepest reaches of our journey, we will navigate the intricate levels of Naraka, the Hindu and Buddhist underworld, that is less a place than a state of being, where consciousness experiences the fruits of its own actions, where time stretches and contracts according to karmic weight, where punishment and purification are two faces of the same cosmic justice, where even the demons who torture are themselves trapped in cycles of suffering. But these are not 7 separate descents. They are 7 facets of one descent, 7 ways of understanding the same great journey that every consciousness must eventually undertake. As we travel through each realm, you will begin to notice how they echo one another, how the rivers of one become the bridges of another, how the guardians change faces but maintain their vigil, how the rulers shift from male to female to neither to both, but always hold the same keys, always ask the same questions, always demand the same price. Listen now to how the air itself changes as we prepare to descend, It grows thicker, heavier, laden with the scent of deep earth and ancient stone. There is moisture here, the kind that seeps through rock over millennia, that forms underground pools that have never known sunlight. There is the smell of minerals, iron and copper, silver and gold, still locked in their primordial veins. There is something else too, harder to name, the scent of time itself, perhaps, or the perfume of memory, or simply the distinctive atmosphere that gathers in places where the boundary between worlds grows thin. The temperature drops, not dramatically, but noticeably, like stepping from sunlight into the shadow of a great tree, or entering a cave on a summer's day. This coolness has a quality to it. It doesn't simply chill the skin, but seems to slow the blood, to quiet the constant chatter of surface thoughts, to draw awareness downward and inward. Sound changes too. The sharp, clear acoustics of the upper world give way to something more muffled, more resonant. Every sound seems to echo, but not in the harsh way of empty halls. These echoes are soft, multiplied, as though every word spoken here is heard by 1,000 invisible listeners, remembered by the stones themselves, woven into the eternal dialogue between surface and depth. And the light. The light changes most of all. It is not the absence of light that defines these realms. That would be too simple. Instead, it is a different kind of light, a light that seems to come from within things rather than falling upon them from outside. Phosphorescent fungi glowing with their pale green fire, veins of crystal catching and amplifying the faintest gleam. The eyes of creatures adapted to eternal darkness, reflecting light that has no source. The luminous bodies of spirits who carry their own illumination, like deep-sea fish in the absolute darkness of oceanic trenches. As we stand at the threshold of our first descent, feel how your body has already begun to prepare itself for this journey. Your breathing has deepened, pulling air all the way down into your belly. The way miners breathe, the way cave divers breathe, the way anyone who ventures into the deep places learns to breathe. Your heartbeat has slowed, become more deliberate, more rhythmic, like a drum beating in a ceremonial cavern, marking time not in minutes, but in eons. Your eyelids have grown heavy, not with ordinary tiredness, but with the weight of approaching vision. For in the underworld, we see not with the eyes of flesh, but with older organs of perception, the dreaming eye, the remembering eye, the eye that sees in symbols and stories rather than surfaces and forms. Before the name comes the sensation, cold marble beneath bare feet, smooth as water frozen mid-flow, polished by the passage of countless souls who have walked this way before. The sound comes next, a distant murmuring, like wind through leaves. But there are no leaves here, no wind. Only the voices of the dead, speaking all at once in languages that predate tongues, telling stories that nobody above remembers anymore. Then the smell reaches you, not the smell of decay as you might expect, but something older, cleaner, the scent of deep caves where water has never seen sunlight, of minerals slowly dissolving over millennia, of air that has been breathed by ghosts and monsters and everything in between. There is cypress here too, that tree sacred to the dead, its resinous perfume mixing with the smoke of offerings that still burn on altars no living priest tends. First, the river, before anything else. There must be the river. Not one river, but 5. Each with its own nature, its own purpose, its own terrible gift. Styx winds its way around the underworld 9 times. The river of hatred, the river by which even the gods swear their most binding oaths. To break a promise sworn on Styx is to invite a punishment that makes death seem merciful. The water is black, not with mud or sediment, but with the weight of every broken promise ever made, every betrayal ever committed, every oath ever sworn in anger and later regretted. Then the Acheron, river of woe, across which Charon poles his ferry, that ancient boatman who was old when the world was young. His boat is made from timber that never grew in sunlight, held together with nails forged from the armor of fallen heroes, sealed with pitch made from the tears of the grieving. The coins placed on dead eyes or under dead tongues are not payment. Not really. They are recognition, acknowledgement that this journey has a cost that cannot be measured in gold or silver, but must be marked nonetheless. The Cocytus follows, river of lamentation, fed not by mountain springs or rainfall, but by the tears of the dead, who mourn their lost lives, who weep for chances not taken, words not spoken, love not declared. Its waters are salt, but not the clean salt of ocean waves. This is the salt of sorrow, concentrated and bitter, burning the throat of any who dare to drink. Phlegethon burns without consuming, a river of fire that flows like water, whose flames cast no shadows, because everything here is already shadow. The dead who were consumed by passion in life are drawn to its banks, warming themselves at fires that give no comfort, remembering heat they can no longer truly feel. The flames speak, if you listen closely enough. They whisper the names of everyone who ever burned with desire, everyone who ever felt passion consume reason, everyone who ever chose the flame over the safe, cold darkness. And finally, deepest of all, the Lethe, river of forgetfulness, whose waters offer the cruelest mercy and the kindest cruelty. To drink from Lethe is to forget everything: your name, your life, your loves, your hates, your very self. The dead cluster at its banks, torn between the agony of remembering and the terror of forgetting, knowing that to drink is to cease to be who they were, but to refuse is to carry the weight of memory through eternity. Between these rivers stretches the geography of the Greek underworld, a landscape that follows no earthly logic, where distance is measured in meaning rather than miles. The asphodel meadows spread grey and endless, filled with the strange white flowers that are neither alive nor dead, that bloom without sunlight and never wilt. Here wander the souls of those who lived neither greatly good nor greatly evil lives, who committed no crimes worth punishing, but performed no deeds worth celebrating. They drift like smoke through the eternal twilight, not suffering, but not happy, not remembered, but not entirely forgotten. The pale flowers of asphodel have no scent that the living would recognize, but the dead detect in them something that makes them cluster close. Perhaps the ghost of what fragrance used to mean. Perhaps the memory of when flowers meant something more than markers of neutral eternity. The souls here speak, but their words are like the rustling of dry leaves, forming no sentences that matter, carrying no messages that anyone needs to hear. They are the ultimate democracy of death, where the merchant and the farmer, the soldier and the scribe all become equal in their gentle insignificance. Beyond the meadows rise the walls of Erebus, that fortress of shadow where Hades holds his court. The walls are built from blocks of crystallized darkness, each one containing the shadow of something that once lived. Here, the shadow of a great oak; there, the shadow of a mountain; there, the shadow of an entire city that fell so long ago. Its name has been forgotten by everyone except the stone. The gates are guarded not just by Cerberus, that three-headed hound whose teeth can tear soul from memory, whose howl can be heard in the world above as the wind that makes dogs whimper and hide, but by the very architecture of approach. To reach the gates, one must walk a path that grows narrower with each step, that forces the traveler to shed assumptions and expectations like unnecessary garments. By the time you stand before Cerberus, you are reduced to essence, to the irreducible core of what you are beneath all the additions and decorations of life. The dog does not judge. Judgment comes later. The dog simply knows. He knows if you belong here or if you are trespassing. He knows if you are truly dead or merely visiting. He knows if you have the permission of his master or if you are attempting to steal what belongs to the realm of shadow. Each of his three heads sees something different. The first head sees who you were, all your past actions trailing behind you like a comet's tail, bright or dark according to your deeds. The second head sees who you are in this moment, the essential self stripped of time and circumstance. The third head sees who you could have been, all the potential futures that your choices foreclosed, all the roads not taken that nevertheless leave their mark on the soul. To pass Cerberus is to be seen completely, to have every secret known, every hidden thought exposed, every private shame and secret pride laid bare. Inside the palace walls, the architecture defies comprehension. Hallways lead up that should lead down. Rooms open onto themselves. Stairs descend infinitely, while bringing you always back to where you started. This is not confusion or chaos. It is simply that the palace exists in more dimensions than mortal minds can process. It accommodates all the dead who have ever been and ever will be, and thus must be larger inside than the entire cosmos, while still fitting within its boundaries in the underworld. The throne room where Hades sits is simultaneously vast and intimate. Every soul who enters feels as though they stand in a great hall filled with multitudes, and yet also as though they are alone with the god, as though his attention is focused entirely on them. The throne itself is carved from a single block of shadow stone, decorated with scenes that change depending on who looks at them. Each soul sees their own life played out in the carved reliefs, their own choices and consequences frozen in black stone. Hades himself is not the monster that later stories made him. He is stern but not cruel, just but not merciful, inevitable but not malicious. He did not choose to rule the dead. The role was assigned to him when the three brothers divided the cosmos. Zeus took the sky with its freedom and lightning. Poseidon claimed the sea with its mysteries and movements. And Hades received the underworld with its stillness and certainty. He rules not because he loves death, but because someone must. Because without order, even death would become chaos. Beside him sits Persephone when she is in residence. Those 6 months when the world above grows cold and barren. She is not the victim that some stories paint her. Not anymore. She has eaten the pomegranate seeds by choice, has claimed her throne through decision rather than deception. She is the queen of the dead, and in her presence, death becomes not an ending, but a transformation. She remembers what it was to live above, to feel sunlight and growth, and she brings that memory into the darkness, not as torment, but as completion. The dead love her in a way they cannot love Hades, for she chose this realm while he was chosen for it. The judgments passed here are not arbitrary. 3 judges sit in their own hall, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, each one a king in life, who proved their wisdom through their reign. They do not judge by laws written in books, but by the weight of souls themselves. A soul carries its own verdict, written in every choice made, every kindness offered or withheld, every moment of courage or cowardice. The judges simply read what is already there, pronounce what the soul has already decided through its living. Those judged worthy of punishment are sent to Tartarus, that pit below the underworld itself, where the air is thick with the screams of the eternally tormented. But even Tartarus follows rules, has structure. The punishments fit not the crime, but the criminal, designed to teach lessons that should have been learned in life. Tantalus reaches for fruit that withdraws, stands in water that recedes when he bends to drink, not because the gods are cruel, but because he must learn what it means to want what you cannot have, to understand the hunger he caused in others through his grotesque feast. Sisyphus pushes his boulder up the mountain again and again, watching it roll back down just before the summit, not out of divine spite, but because he must understand the futility of trying to cheat death, must experience the endless repetition of meaningless labor that he inflicted on others through his deceits. The rock is exactly as heavy as his crimes, grows heavier with each push as understanding slowly dawns. The Danaids pour water into broken vessels that can never be filled, wedding their punishment to their crime of murdering their husbands on their wedding night. The water is the same temperature as blood, has the same weight, the same way of slipping through fingers. They pour, and sometimes, just sometimes, one of them pauses and understands, truly understands, what it means to destroy something that could have held love, to break the vessel of trust and possibility. In that moment of understanding, the punishment changes, becomes something else. Though what that something else might be, only the transformed soul knows. But not all of Hades' realm is punishment and neutral wandering. The Elysian fields exist too. Those blessed isles where heroes feast and compete and tell their stories over and over, each telling slightly different, each hero remembering their life as perhaps a bit more glorious than it was. But this is not delusion. This is the privilege of the heroic dead, to become their own legend, to inhabit the story of themselves rather than the messy reality. The grass in Elysium is always the perfect green of early summer, the temperature always the exact warmth of a perfect day, the wine always precisely as sweet or dry as the drinker prefers. Musicians play, but the music never grows repetitive. Athletes compete, but injuries heal instantly, and defeat carries no shame. Philosophers debate, but their arguments generate light rather than heat, understanding rather than division. It is paradise, but a very Greek paradise, not an absence of all struggle, but a perfection of struggle, where effort brings reward and competition brings honor rather than bitterness. Sometimes heroes leave Elysium to visit other parts of the underworld. Achilles might walk the asphodel meadows, remembering what it was like to be ordinary, to not carry the weight of destiny. Odysseus sometimes stands by the Lethe, contemplating whether forgetting would be better than remembering all his cleverness that brought such suffering. But they always return to Elysium because even in death, they cannot escape being who they were, who they are, who they will always be in the stories that the living tell. Orpheus came here once while still alive, carrying his lyre and his unbearable grief. The music he played made Cerberus weep from all three heads, made the judges set aside their scrolls, made even the tormented in Tartarus pause in their punishments to listen. He played for Hades and Persephone, and the queen of the dead remembered what it was like to lose what you love most, to be separated from the sunlight of your life. She whispered to her husband, and the stern god relented, allowing Eurydice to follow Orpheus back to the world above on one condition: that he not look back until both had reached the sunlight. The path upward is longer than the path down, because hope makes every step heavier than despair. Orpheus climbed and climbed, playing his lyre to guide Eurydice, never hearing her footsteps, because the dead make no sound when they walk. Doubt crept in like water through stone. Was she really there? Had Hades tricked him? Was this all a cruel joke by gods who loved to see mortals suffer? Just as the first ray of sunlight touched his face, just as he stepped from shadow into light, he turned, and Eurydice was there, her hand reaching for his, her face full of love and understanding and terrible sorrow. But she had not yet reached the light, and so she faded, dissolved like mist in morning, fell back into the darkness, this time forever. The underworld remembers every visitor, living or dead. Their stories become part of its architecture, woven into the very fabric of the place. Heracles' footprints are still visible where he dragged Cerberus to the surface. The tears Demeter wept for Persephone formed new streams that feed into the Cocytus. The blood from Psyche's hands, when she gathered the golden fleece-stained rocks that still glimmer with red gold light. Each visitor changes the underworld slightly, adds their thread to the vast tapestry of death and memory and transformation. As we prepare to leave the Greek underworld to transition into the next realm, notice how its boundaries are not walls, but gradual changes. The marble floors become rougher, colder. The carefully ordered architecture gives way to natural caves and tunnels. The sound of classical Greek fades into older languages, harder consonants. The sound of ice cracking and wolves howling. The Mediterranean warmth, even the warmth of a Mediterranean underground, gives way to something sharper, more bitter, more absolutely final. The river Styx flows on, but now it begins to freeze at the edges, ice forming in black crystals that sing when they crack. Cerberus's barking becomes the howling of different hounds, hounds that guard different gates. The shadows deepen and cool, and somewhere in the distance, a bridge made from the bones of the dead begins to take shape, and beyond it, the realm where hell waits, patient as winter, inevitable as frost. The transition comes as frost creeping across water, as the slow crystallization of darkness into something harder, colder, more absolute. Where the Greek underworld held the warmth of marble that remembered sunlight, here there is only the cold that existed before the first flame was lit. The cold that will remain after the last star dies. Your breath becomes visible, not as steam, but as tiny ice crystals that fall like microscopic snow. Each exhalation adding to the ancient accumulation of frozen breath that carpets this realm. The sound changes first, before your eyes adjust to this new darkness. Gone is the multitudinous murmur of Greek souls discussing their eternities. Here, the silence is so complete, it has weight, substance, presence. It presses against your eardrums like deep water, makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own blood moving through veins that are suddenly too warm for this place. When sound does come, it arrives in sharp cracks, ice breaking somewhere in the darkness. The scrape of bone against frozen stone, the distant howl of something that might once have been a wolf, but has become something else in this eternal winter. Your feet find not marble, but permafrost, mixed with something that crunches underfoot. Looking down, if down has meaning here, you see you are walking on a path made from the fingernails of the dead. The Norse believed that the nails of corpses must be trimmed before burial, lest they contribute to Naglfar, the ship made entirely from dead men's nails that will sail at Ragnarok. But here in Helheim, such materials are the substance of architecture itself. The path spirals downward, always downward, following a geometry that predates human mathematics. The guardian appears before you understand you have reached a threshold. Garmr, the blood-stained hound, who makes Cerberus seem like a household pet. Where Cerberus judges and evaluates, Garmr simply hungers. His howl is the sound that makes brave men soil themselves in their sleep, that turns milk sour in the udder, that causes pregnant women to miscarry. He is chained at the entrance to Gnipahellir, the cliff cave that serves as the mouth of Helheim, and his chain is forged from the sound of cats' footsteps, the beard of women, the roots of mountains, the sinews of bears, the breath of fish, and the spittle of birds. All things that do not exist, making a chain that cannot be broken by anything that does exist. But Garmr is not the only guardian. Beyond him stretches Gjallarbru, the bridge over the river of the dead, roofed with gleaming gold that provides the only light in this realm, not warm gold like sunlight, but cold gold like the eyes of serpents, like the last gleam of sunset in winter before the eternal night begins. The bridge's keeper is Modgud, a maiden whose name means furious battle. Though she stands perfectly still, has stood perfectly still since before the first human drew breath. She does not ask your name, she knows it. She does not ask your business, she sees it. She only asks one question: why do the living seek the dead? And there is no right answer. Every answer is wrong in its own way, reveals its own form of presumption or desperation or foolishness. To seek the dead because you mourn them is to deny the natural order. To seek them for wisdom is to admit the living know nothing. To seek them for power is to confess your weakness. To seek them for love is to acknowledge that love itself is a kind of death. Modgud does not judge your answer. She simply notes it, and that notation becomes part of who you are in this realm, determines what you will see, whom you will meet, how deep you will be permitted to go. The bridge trembles under living feet in a way it never does under the dead. The dead weigh nothing here. They are made of the same substance as Helheim itself, cold and shadow and memory frozen into form. But the living carry warmth, and warmth is an aberration here, a violation of the fundamental nature of this place. Each footstep leaves a brief puddle of melted ice that immediately refreezes, but changed, carrying now the memory of warmth, the fossil of a moment when something in Helheim was not absolute zero. Beyond the bridge, the realm opens into vastness that has no horizon, no sky, no real ground, only layers and levels of cold and darkness, each with its own qualities, its own particular flavor of ending. The architecture here is not built, but accreted, formed from the slow accumulation of frozen breath and crystallized sorrow, and the peculiar substance that forms when hope dies at extremely low temperatures. The goddess Hel rules from her hall, Eljudnir, whose name means damp with sleet, a palace that exists in a state of permanent dissolution and reformation, built from materials that are simultaneously rotting and frozen, decaying and preserved. The walls weep constantly, but the tears freeze before they can fall. creating curtains of ice that hold within them the distorted reflections of everyone who has ever passed through these halls. Hell herself defies simple description, being literally half living and half dead, split down the middle like a pedagogical illustration of mortality itself. Her living half is said to be beautiful, though it is the beauty of the last apple on a winter tree, the beauty of the final flower before frost, the beauty of things about to end. Her dead half is not decomposed, but simply absent of life, like a statue carved from the concept of emptiness, like a shadow cast by nothing. When she moves, the two halves move in perfect synchrony, yet seem to exist in different moments. The living half moves through the present, while the dead half moves through the past, or perhaps the future, or perhaps through no time at all. She did not choose this role any more than she chose her nature. Born of Loki's liaison with the giantess Angrboda, she was cast into Helheim by Odin when the gods recognized what she would become. But casting was also coronation in sending her to rule the dead. Odin gave her power over fully 9 worlds, all those levels of death that are not glorious enough for Valhalla or Folkvanger. She rules more souls than all the other gods combined, commands a kingdom vaster than Asgard and Midgard together. Her bed is called Kor, meaning sick bed, though it is less a place of rest than a monument to the impossibility of rest. Her dish is called hunger, and no matter how much is placed upon it, it always appears empty. Her knife is sulter, famine, and everything it cuts becomes less than it was before. These are not possessions, but extensions of her nature, physical manifestations of the principle she embodies, the slow, patient, inexorable consumption of all things by entropy. The dead who come to her realm are not judged in the Greek sense. There is no weighing of deeds, no trial, no possibility of appeal. You are here because you did not die gloriously in battle, and that is the only criterion that matters. Disease, age, accident, murder in your sleep. The how does not matter, only that your death lacked the particular quality that would have drawn the Valkyrie's attention. This is not punishment. This is simply where most people go, have always gone, will always go. Helheim is the default, not the exception. The realm itself is divided into regions, though not by walls or boundaries, but by degrees of cold and types of silence. In some areas, the dead stand frozen in place, not suffering, but not moving, locked in a single moment of existence that extends forever. They are aware, but not thinking, present, but not experiencing, existing in a state that has no equivalent in life. In other regions, the dead move through parodies of their former lives, farming fields of ice that yield harvests of frozen grain, sailing ships across seas that are solid all the way down, fighting battles where every wound heals immediately, because you cannot kill what is already dead. There is no torment here in the classical sense. Hell does not punish. She simply contains. The suffering, such as it is, comes from the nature of existence here rather than from any imposed penalty. To be dead in Helheim is to be cold without the possibility of warmth, to be hungry without the possibility of satiation, to be weary without the possibility of rest. It is to exist in a state of permanent, almost sleeping, almost waking, almost remembering who you were, almost forgetting who you are. The Norse described this realm with a peculiar mixture of horror and acceptance. They did not pretend it was pleasant, did not comfort themselves with thoughts of eternal bliss for the ordinary dead. They faced the reality that most people would end up in this cold, quiet place, and they prepared for it the way they prepared for winter, not with joy, but with grim determination to endure what must be endured. Sometimes, very rarely, someone escapes Helheim. The god Hermod rode here on Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse, to plead for Baldur's return after Loki's treachery led to the bright god's death. Hel agreed to release Baldur if everything in the world would weep for him. And everything did weep. Stones wept, trees wept, metals wept, all creation mourned the bright god's passing. All except one giantess named Tuk, who was Loki in disguise, who refused to shed a single tear. And so Baldur remains in Helheim, will remain until Ragnarok breaks all bonds and remakes all worlds. But Baldur's presence changes Helheim, adds a quality of light to its darkness, though it is the light of a star so distant, its illumination takes eons to arrive. He sits in Hel's hall, and his presence makes the other dead remember beauty, remember joy, remember what it was like when the world was young and death was just a story told to frighten children. This remembering is its own form of torment, but also its own form of grace. The roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, extend even here, and the dragon Nidhögr gnaws at them constantly, slowly weakening the structure that holds all 9 worlds in place. The dragon is not evil in the moral sense. It simply is what it is, does what it must do. Its gnawing is the sound of entropy itself, the slow dissolution of all ordered systems into chaos. Sometimes the dead gather to watch it work, finding in its patient destruction something almost like entertainment, almost like purpose. As we prepare to leave Helheim, notice how the cold has become familiar, almost comfortable. This is the danger of all underworlds. They make their own logic seem inevitable, their own nature seem like the only possible nature. The ice begins to thin, becomes water, then mist, then something that is not quite air, but not quite absence. The sound of Nidhogra's gnawing becomes the sound of something else, distant singing perhaps, or chanting, or the rhythmic beating of oars against water. The light changes too, from the cold gold of Yallarbru to something warmer, richer, the color of sand under starlight, the color of papyrus by candle flame. The Nordic cold gives way to desert heat, but it is the heat of night rather than day, the heat that comes from below rather than above. We are approaching the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where death is not an ending, but a transformation, where the sun itself dies each night, only to be reborn each dawn. The first sensation is dryness. A dryness so complete it pulls moisture from your breath, from your eyes, from thoughts themselves. This is not the desiccation of desert sun, but something older, the dryness that existed before the first waters were separated from the void, the dryness of papyrus that has waited 3,000 years in a sealed tomb, the dryness of sand that has never known rain. Your tongue becomes aware of itself, heavy and foreign in your mouth. Your skin tightens, not uncomfortably, but with the peculiar sensation of being preserved, of becoming something that will last forever. The darkness here has a different quality than either the shadow of Greek Hades or the frozen void of Helheim. This is the darkness inside sealed chambers, the darkness of closed eyes, the darkness that exists in the space between stars. But within this darkness move lights that follow no earthly logic, the bioluminescent glow of scarab beetles that roll balls of light instead of dung, the phosphorescent trails left by the solar bark as it makes its nightly journey, the steady gleam of divine eyes that never blink, never close, never cease their eternal vigil. The Duat does not exist in one place or even one dimension. It is simultaneously beneath the earth, beyond the western horizon, inside the body of the sky goddess Nut, and within every grain of sand in every desert that has ever been or will ever be. To enter the Duat is to exist in multiple states simultaneously, to be both here and there, both then and now, both yourself and every version of yourself that might have been. The geography reshapes itself with each passing moment, not chaotically, but according to patterns that predate human understanding. What appears as a corridor of stone becomes a river of sand, becomes a hall of judgment, becomes the inside of a serpent's belly, becomes a field of reeds, becomes a corridor of stone again, but changed, carrying the memory of all its other forms. The dead navigate not by landmarks, but by understanding, by gradually learning to perceive the permanent beneath the mutable. Ra's solar bark appears first as a distant gleam, like a torch seen across an impossibly vast desert. But distance in the Duat has nothing to do with space and everything to do with comprehension. The bark is infinitely far away and immediately present, too vast to perceive and small enough to hold in your palm. It is made from the wood of trees that grew before creation, bound with ropes woven from the hair of the goddess Isis, sealed with pitch made from the tears shed at the first death. Upon the bark stands Ra in his night form, not the falcon-headed deity of noon, but ram-headed of flesh, the god in his moment of deepest weakness and greatest transformation. He is dying. He dies every night, must die every night, so that he can be reborn every morning. This is not metaphor, but mechanism, the actual process by which tomorrow becomes possible. Around him stand the protective deities, Sia and Hu, divine perception and divine utterance. Heka, the god of magic itself. And sometimes, when the danger is greatest, the goddess Isis, whose words of power can reshape reality itself. But the journey is never safe, never certain. Apophis waits in the darkness, that serpent of chaos whose body is made from all the things that should not exist but do. The malice of stones, the hunger of emptiness, the rage of silence. Every night it attacks the solar bark, and every night it must be defeated, not destroyed. For Apophis cannot be destroyed, being made of the principle of destruction itself. It can only be temporarily overcome, driven back, made to wait another day before trying again to swallow the sun and end the cycle of existence. The battle is fought with weapons that exist only in the Duat, spears made from solidified prayers, nets woven from the names of the dead, words of power that make reality reorganize itself according to divine will. The dead sometimes join this battle, those who have learned the proper spells, who have memorized the correct passages from the Book of the Dead. They stand on the banks of the underground Nile and speak the words that weaken Apophis, that strengthen Ra, that help tomorrow arrive on schedule. Beyond the path of the solar bark stretch the many regions of the Duat, each with its own particular dangers and guardians. The Hall of Two Truths rises from the darkness like a mountain made of justice itself. Here sits Osiris, green-skinned and bound in white linen, holding the crook and flail that mark him as lord of both cultivation and punishment. He does not speak. He has no need to speak. His presence alone is judgment, his existence the standard against which all souls are measured. Before him stands the scale, perfect in its balance, absolute in its honesty. On one side is placed the heart of the deceased, on the other, a single feather from the head of Mahat, goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The feather weighs exactly as much as a life lived in harmony with Mahat should weigh, no more, no less. The heart, meanwhile, carries the weight of every lie told, every cruelty committed, every moment when the soul chose chaos over order, selfishness over harmony. Thoth, ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, records the result with a reed pen that writes in ink made from ground stars and the soot of burned prayers. His record is absolute, cannot be altered, cannot be appealed. He writes not just the result, but the entire process, every fluctuation of the scale, every tremor that reveals a half-forgotten sin or an unremembered kindness. His writing becomes part of the fabric of reality itself, woven into the structure of what is and what must be. If the heart proves heavier than the feather, Amit waits. She is the devourer, part crocodile, part leopard, part hippopotamus, combining the three animals most feared by ancient Egyptians into one impossible creature of final judgment. She does not chew, she swallows hearts whole, and with them, the entire existence of the soul. To be eaten by Amit is not to die, but to never have existed, to be erased, not just from the future, but from the past, to become less than nothing, less than forgotten. But for those whose hearts balance or prove lighter than the feather, the Duat offers not one afterlife, but many, each suited to the nature and understanding of the soul. The field of reeds spreads infinite and green, a perfected version of the Nile Valley, where the blessed dead farm fields that never fail, where the flood always comes at the perfect time with the perfect amount of water, where work is pleasure and rest is perfect. Here, the dead live lives that are idealized versions of their earthly existence, all the joy with none of the suffering, all the satisfaction with none of the struggle. Others choose to join Ra's entourage, to ride the solar bark through its eternal cycle, to participate directly in the daily recreation of the world. They learn the words of power, the secret names of things, the spells that make and unmake reality. They become part of the mechanism of existence itself. Their consciousness merged with the great cycles of creation and destruction that keep the universe functioning. Still others become stars, their souls transformed into points of light that help navigate both the physical and spiritual worlds. The Egyptians saw the night sky not as empty space punctuated by distant suns, but as a vast map of the afterlife, each star a soul that had achieved its own particular form of immortality. The constellation we call Orion, they knew as Osiris himself, striding across the sky. Sirius was Isis, following her husband in eternal devotion. The Duat contains also the lake of fire, where those who opposed Ma'at in life are purified rather than punished. The fire burns away impurities of spirit, the way earthly fire purifies gold, leaving only what is essential, eternal, true. Some souls spend eons in this lake, slowly dissolving and reforming until they achieve the proper spiritual way to pass judgment. This is not torment, but transformation. Not punishment, but purification. The architecture of the Duat reflects its nature as a place of constant transformation. Walls are covered with hieroglyphs that change their meaning based on who reads them and when. A single symbol might be a bird to one soul, a sound to another, a complete prayer to a third. The texts write themselves, adding new chapters as new souls arrive, incorporating their stories into the eternal narrative of death and rebirth. The demons and guardians of the Duat are not evil, but necessary. Each one representing a particular challenge the soul must overcome to achieve its transformation. They have names that describe their function. He who lives on snakes, blood drinker who comes from the slaughterhouse, bone breaker who speaks truth. To pass them requires not strength, but knowledge. Knowing their names, knowing the proper words to speak, knowing how to transform fear into understanding. The goddess Hathor sometimes appears in the Duat in her role as Lady of the West, welcoming the newly dead with the sistrum's gentle rattle and the promise that death is not ending, but alteration. She offers the dead the milk of transformation, drawn from celestial cows that graze on the dreams of the living. To drink is to forget the pain of dying while remembering everything else, to shed the terror of transition while keeping the wisdom it brings. The Duat remembers everything. Every soul that has ever passed through leaves its mark, its story becoming part of the eternal record. The walls grow thicker with each generation, not in space, but in meaning, containing within their hieroglyphs every possible combination of life and death, every variation on the theme of existence. To read these walls completely would take longer than the universe has existed, will exist, could ever exist. Time in the Duat moves in circles rather than lines, but they are not simple circles. They spiral, each revolution slightly different from the last, creating a helix of existence that extends infinitely in all directions. The dead experience their judgment simultaneously as something that happened, is happening, and will happen. They exist in a state of eternal present that contains all pasts and all futures, all possibilities and all certainties. As we prepare to leave the Duat, Notice how the dryness has changed your perception. Colors seem more vivid even in darkness. Sounds carry meanings beyond their vibrations. Thoughts have texture and weight. The hieroglyphs on the walls begin to shift, their bird forms becoming more abstract, more curved, taking on the characteristics of different writing systems. The desert heat transforms into something denser, more humid, carrying the scent of rain and rot and rich earth. The sound of the solar bark's oars becomes the sound of different water, darker water, water that has never seen the sun. The Egyptian order, with its careful categories and precise judgments, begins to blur at the edges, becoming something more ambiguous, more concerned with pollution than sin, with boundaries than morality. We are approaching Yomi, the Japanese land of yellow springs, where death is not about judgment, but about separation, where the greatest tragedy is not evil, but contamination. The change comes as humidity, thick and cloying, replacing the desert dryness of the Duat with air so heavy with moisture, it feels like breathing through wet cloth. This is not the clean humidity of morning mist or ocean spray, but something thicker, older, carrying within it the spores of fungi that have never seen daylight, the exhalations of creatures that breathe decay instead of air. Your clothes, if clothes have meaning here, become heavy with this moisture, clinging to your skin like grave shrouds, like the wet earth that fills mouths and covers eyes. The descent to Yomi begins not with a gate or bridge, but with a gradual separation, a pulling away from everything that belongs to the world of light and life. The path is called Yomotsu Hirasaka, the slope that leads to the land of yellow springs. Though the yellow is not the yellow of sunlight or gold, but the yellow of bones aged in earth, of parchment made from human skin, of eyes that have clouded over in death. The slope seems gentle at first, almost imperceptible. But with each step, return becomes more difficult, not physically, but spiritually, as if the very essence of life is being leached away. Sound here is muffled, distorted, as if heard through layers of earth and root and stone. There is constant dripping, though from what and onto what remains unclear. There is the rustle of things moving in darkness, things that might once have been human but have been changed by their long residence in this place of fundamental pollution. There is whispering, always whispering, in languages that predate speech, in tongues that will be spoken after the last human voice falls silent. The concept of kegare pervades everything here. Ritual impurity, spiritual pollution, the contamination that comes from contact with death, blood, and decay. In Yomi, everything is kegare, saturated with it, made from it. To enter here is to become polluted in ways that no purification can entirely cleanse. Even the gods who venture here return changed, diminished, carrying within them a seed of corruption that will eventually bloom into their own ending. The landscape of Yomi defies mapping not because it changes, but because it exists in a state of permanent deterioration that never quite completes itself. Mountains crumble but never fall. Rivers flow but never reach their destination. Structures decay but never fully collapse. It is a world caught in an eternal moment of rot, where decomposition is not a process but a state of being. The palace of Izanami rises from this landscape like a tumor from flesh, built from materials that should not hold together but do. Beams of crystallized screams, walls of compressed shadow, floors of fossilized tears. The palace is vast beyond comprehension, containing rooms that no one has entered since the separation of heaven and earth. Halls where the only footprints in the dust are those of things that should not have feet. Izanami herself rules from the deepest chamber. She who was once the goddess of creation, who birthed islands and gods with her husband Izanagi, who died giving birth to the god of fire and descended to this place of eternal decay. She is no longer what she was. The beauty that once made the heavens weep with joy has become something else. Not ugliness exactly, but a wrongness that the mind refuses to fully process. When Izanagi came seeking her, breaking the taboo against the living, entering the land of the dead, he found her in the darkness of their marriage chamber. She spoke with the voice he remembered, sweet and loving, asking only that he wait while she prepared herself, that he not light any fires, that he respect the darkness of her new realm. But love makes fools of gods as easily as men, and Izanagi lit a comb from his hair to see his beloved wife. What he saw sent him fleeing in horror that has become legendary. Izanami's body was no longer singular, but multiple, hosting maggots that were themselves gods, decay given consciousness and purpose. Her flesh fell away and regenerated in waves, showing bone, then muscle, then skin, then bone again, an endless cycle of decomposition and failed reconstitution. Her eyes were not eyes, but passages to deeper darknesses. Her mouth not a mouth, but a gateway to hungers that have no names. The rage of Izanami at this betrayal, this violation of her explicit wish, shook the foundations of existence itself. She sent after him the shikome, the foul women of Yomi, creatures that were once human but have been transformed by eons of residence in this polluted realm. They run on all fours, but are not animals, speak in voices that are almost human, but not quite, hunger for things that the living possess but cannot name, warmth perhaps, or innocence, or simply the quality of not yet being dead. Behind the Shikome came the 8 thunder gods that had been born from Izanami's rotting corpse, each one representing a different aspect of decay and disaster. Thunder of the head, thunder of the breast, thunder of the stomach, thunder of the back, thunder of the buttocks, thunder of the genitals, thunder of the left hand, thunder of the right foot. A complete anatomy of decomposition, given divine form and murderous intent. Izanagi fled up the slope of Yomotsu Hirasaka, and at the boundary between death and life, he sealed the entrance with a boulder that would require 1,000 men to move. Through the stone, Izanami swore her eternal curse. For his betrayal, she would strangle 1,000 of the living every day. And Izanagi responded with his own vow. Then he would cause 1,500 to be born. Thus was established the fundamental imbalance that ensures life temporarily triumphs over death, though death always waits, patient and certain. But the relationship between Izanami and Izanagi is more complex than simple enmity. They are still married, still bound by ties that predate creation itself. Sometimes, on nights when the boundary between worlds grows thin, their voices can be heard in conversation through the great stone, not the rage of betrayal or the fear of corruption, but the quiet talk of a couple who have been together so long that love and hate have become indistinguishable, who continue their relationship not despite its dysfunction, but because of it. The dead who come to Yomi do not face judgment or punishment. They simply exist in a state of graduated decay, becoming less themselves and more part of the general pollution that defines this realm. They eat the food of Yomi, not because they hunger, but because eating it completes their separation from the world above. The food has no taste that the living would recognize, provides no nourishment in any conventional sense. It is the idea of food corrupted, the memory of sustenance gone wrong. There are no fields of blessing here, no rewards for virtue, no punishments for sin. The Japanese conception of death in Yomi is not moral but practical. Death is pollution, and pollution must be contained, separated from the pure world of the living. The dead are not evil, merely contaminated. Their suffering, such as it is, comes not from divine punishment, but from the nature of existence without the animating force of life. The river Sansu flows through Yomi, though its source and destination are equally mysterious. It has different depths for different souls, ankle deep for those who lived good lives, waist deep for those of mixed virtue, a raging torrent for the truly wicked. But these depths are not judgments, merely natural consequences. The river responding to the spiritual weight of the souls that cross it. On its banks pile the clothes of children who died too young to accumulate either virtue or sin. Their garments building into mountains of tiny shoes and small robes that will never be worn again. The sound of Yomi is constant but subdued. The drip of decomposition, the whisper of things falling apart, the soft susurrus of decay working its patient way through everything that once lived. There are no screams here, no dramatic torments. Suffering in Yomi is quiet, personal, internal. The suffering of becoming less, of dissolving, of losing coherence one memory at a time. Sometimes living heroes have ventured here, always for love, always unsuccessfully. They bring light and life into this realm of darkness and decay. But these qualities are violations of Yomi's nature. The light they carry casts shadows that should not exist. Their warmth melts structures held together by cold. Their very presence is an insult to the careful balance of pollution and purity that keeps the worlds separate. The Oni and yokai that sometimes escape from Yomi into the world above carry with them traces of this fundamental contamination. They are not evil in the Western sense, but polluted, wrong, existing in violation of the natural order. They must be exorcised, not because they mean harm, but because their very presence spreads the contamination of death into the world of life. As we prepare to transition from Yomi, notice how the pollution has affected your perception. Nothing seems quite right anymore. Colors are shifted slightly from where they should be. Sounds come from the wrong directions. Thoughts move in patterns that consciousness was not meant to follow. The humidity begins to change, becoming less oppressive and more mystical, carrying sense of earth and green, growing things rather than decay. The whispers of the dead become something else, singing perhaps, or the sound of harps strung with silver wire, or the distant laughter of beings that are neither alive nor dead, but something sideways to both. The corruption of Yomi transforms into something more ambiguous, neither pure nor polluted, but existing in a state that predates such distinctions. We are approaching the Celtic Otherworld, where death and life are not opposites but dance partners, where the boundaries between worlds are gossamer thin veils that part at sunset and seal at dawn. The mist comes first, not the thick humidity of Yomi, but something lighter, more playful, carrying within it the scent of apple blossoms and autumn leaves, of honey mead and peat smoke, of things that are simultaneously ancient and immediate. This mist has consciousness, or at least intention. It parts before you when it wishes you to proceed, thickens when it wants you to wait, swirls in patterns that almost form words in languages that were old when Latin was young. The Celtic Otherworld does not exist below or above or beyond, but beside, separated from our world by boundaries so thin that sometimes people cross without knowing, spend what seems like hours at a feast, only to return and find centuries have passed, or live for years in fairy kingdoms only to emerge and discover the sun has barely moved across the sky. Time here moves not forward or backward, but in spirals and knots. Celtic patterns made temporal, weaving through itself in designs that please the eye but confound the mind. There is no single entrance, no guardian at the gate, no bridge to cross or river to ford. The other world opens where it will, through fairy rings of mushrooms that appear overnight, through the hollow hills that look solid from outside, but contain kingdoms vast as continents, through lakes that reflect skies that don't exist above them, through the door of any house, if you knock the right pattern at the right hour on the right night of the year. The Sidhe rule here, or perhaps inhabit is a better word, for ruling implies a hierarchy that doesn't quite fit their nature. They are not gods exactly, nor are they the dead, though the dead sometimes join them. They are something else, something that existed before the division between mortal and immortal was established. Beings of such perfect beauty that to look upon them directly can drive mortals mad with longing, or of such terrible aspect that armies have fled rather than face them. The landscape of the otherworld shifts not randomly, but according to story logic. A forest path leads to a castle, which contains a garden, which holds a well, which descends to a forest that might be the same forest, or might be its reflection, or might be every forest that ever was condensed into a single eternal wood. Mountains exist that can be climbed from the inside. Rivers flow uphill when they have somewhere important to be. And the sea sometimes forgets it's supposed to stay at the edges and wanders inland to visit. There are multiple kingdoms within the otherworld, each with its own character, its own rules, its own particular relationship with time and mortality. Tir na Nog, the land of the young, where no one ages, and sorrow is unknown, where music never stops and stories never end, where heroes feast and fight and love without consequence or conclusion. But even paradise has its shadows. Those who dwell too long in Tir na Nog find that joy without sorrow becomes meaningless, that eternal youth is its own form of death, that stories without endings are not stories at all, but prisons made of words. Mag Mel, the plain of delight, spreads endlessly under skies that can't decide if they're dawn or dusk, colored with hues that don't exist in mortal spectrums. Here grow the silver trees, whose fruit grants wisdom, the golden trees whose fruit bestows poetry, and the crystal trees whose fruit reveals truth. Though whether these gifts are blessings or curses depends entirely on who receives them and when. Tekduin, the House of Dawn, rises from a rocky island where the dead gather before moving on to their next destination. Dawn, the Dark One, the first mortal to die in Ireland, became the Lord of the Dead not through divine appointment, but through the simple fact of being first. He is not grim like Hades or cold like hell, but patient, almost paternal, gathering the souls of the departed like a shepherd, gathering sheep, not to judge or punish, but simply to ensure they reach where they're meant to go. The wild hunt rides through all these kingdoms and beyond, led sometimes by gods, sometimes by heroes, sometimes by figures whose names are better not spoken. The hunt is not evil, though mortals who encounter it rarely survive unchanged. It is the otherworld in motion, all its wild magic and terrible beauty condensed into a single riding that follows no roads and respects no boundaries. To hear the hunt's horns is to know that the veil is not just thin but torn, that the ordinary world's rule are temporarily suspended, that anything might happen and probably will. The feast halls of the otherworld deserve special mention, for they are where much of consequence occurs. These halls expand to accommodate any number of guests. Their tables never empty, no matter how much is consumed. Their fires never die, no matter how long they burn. The food has flavors that mortal tongues can't quite process. Meat that tastes of memories, bread that carries the essence of summer afternoons, wine that contains entire symphonies in each sip. But there are rules about eating in the other world, ancient compacts and unspoken agreements. To accept food freely given binds you to nothing, but to take without permission or to refuse what's offered can have consequences that ripple through generations. Some mortals have eaten fairy food and found themselves unable to stomach mortal fare again, wasting away from a hunger that no earthly meal can satisfy. Others have refused the hospitality of the Sídhe and found that food turns to ash in their mouths, that water runs from their cupped hands, that the earth itself rejects their presence. Music in the otherworld is not performed, but exists, constant as breathing, woven into the fundamental fabric of the place. Harps play themselves, their strings touched by fingers made of wind. Songs sing themselves, harmonizing with the speaker's words, whether they will it or not. The music can heal or harm, inspire or madden, transport the listener across vast distances, or trap them in a single eternal moment of perfect beauty or perfect terror. The mortals who venture here, and there have been many, drawn by love or loss, ambition or accident, find that they return changed, if they return at all. Some come back with gifts, the ability to heal with a touch, to speak with animals, to know the future in dreams. Others return with burdens, the inability to lie, the compulsion to dance whenever music plays, the knowledge of exactly when and how they will die. Still others come back wrong, wearing their own faces but animated by something else, speaking with their own voices but saying things their loved ones know they would never say. Cuchulainn ventured here and returned with his terrible battle rage. Oisin lived here for what seemed like 3 years with Neve of the golden hair, only to find that 300 years had passed in mortal lands. Pwyll traded places with Araun, lord of Anwan, ruling the otherworld for a year and a day, learning that even paradise requires governance, that even immortals have politics, that even in lands where death has no meaning, change must still be managed and consequences still matter. The relationship between the otherworld and mortal realm is not one of separation, but of interweaving. They are two tapestries made from the same threads, viewed from different angles. What appears as a hill in our world might be a palace in theirs. A standing stone might be a frozen giant, waiting for the right word to wake it. A seemingly ordinary person might carry otherworld blood, manifesting strange abilities when the moon is dark or the tide is turning. The Celtic Otherworld remembers everything, but not in the linear way of mortal memory. It remembers in patterns and cycles, in the return of seasons and the repetition of stories. The same tale plays out over and over with different actors. The young hero who must prove himself, the sovereignty goddess who tests him, the challenge that cannot be met by strength alone but requires wisdom or sacrifice, or the admission of weakness. There is no permanent death here, but neither is there permanent life. Beings exist in states of constant transformation. The warrior who becomes a salmon, who becomes an eagle, who becomes a grain of wheat, who becomes a warrior again, changed by the journey through forms. This is not reincarnation in the Eastern sense, but something more fluid, less structured, a constant flow of consciousness through different vessels, gathering experiences like a river gathering tributaries. The otherworld's influence on our world is strongest at the liminal times, dawn and dusk, the turning of seasons, the moments between sleep and waking. On Samhain, when summer dies and winter is born, the veil becomes so thin, it's barely there at all. The dead walk freely. The Sidhe ride out in processions visible to mortal eyes, and the future can be glimpsed in the patterns of smoke and the flight of birds. As we prepare to leave the Celtic Otherworld, notice how its ambiguity has affected your perception. Nothing is quite certain anymore, whether you're awake or dreaming. whether time is passing or standing still, whether the beings around you are alive, dead, or something that exists outside such categories. The mist begins to thicken, taking on a different quality, heavier, older, carrying the scent of river mud and canal water, of cities built and destroyed and built again. The music of harps becomes the sound of lyres. The Celtic spirals straighten into cuneiform. The green hills flatten into desert plains broken by two great rivers. We are descending now into the oldest underworld humans have imagined. Older than writing, older than cities, as old as the moment humans first began to bury their dead, with gifts for a journey they could only imagine. We approach Irkalla, the great below of Mesopotamia, where Ereshkigal rules in darkness that existed before the gods thought to create light. The dust comes before anything else. Dust that tastes of millennia, of cities ground to powder, of tablets of cuneiform crushed back into clay, of bones become indistinguishable from the earth that held them. This dust is in the air, on your tongue, in your lungs, becoming part of you with every breath. It carries memories of the first cities, Uruk and Ur, Babylon and Nineveh, places where humans first gathered in numbers large enough to need laws, to need gods, to need explanations for what happens after the laws are broken and the gods turn away and the darkness comes. The entrance to Irkalla is not hidden or ambiguous like the Celtic paths. It announces itself with terrible clarity. A gate of bronze that has turned green with verdigris, massive beyond comprehension, carved with warnings in languages that predate language, in symbols that speak directly to the primitive brain that knows fear before it knows words. This is the gate of no return, and its name is not metaphor, but simple statement of fact. 7 gates there are, each one stripping something from those who pass through. Each demanding its toll not in coins or prayers, but in essence itself. When Inanna, Queen of Heaven, descended to visit her sister Ereshkigal, she wore her finest regalia, her crown of heaven, her lapis lazuli necklace, her breastplate of dominion, her ring of power, her measuring rod of justice, her garment of ladyship. At each gate, the gatekeeper Lethe demanded one item, one aspect of her power, until she arrived in the throne room naked and helpless, stripped of everything that made her who she was. The stripping is not cruelty, but necessity. The living cannot enter the land of the dead while still clothed in life. Power means nothing here, beauty less than nothing. Gold and jewels are just different colors of dust. The only currency that matters is the simple fact of being dead. And even that buys nothing but existence in a place where existence itself is questionable. The geography of Irkalla reflects its nature as the ultimate democracy. not the democracy of equals, but the democracy of the equally diminished. No great halls for heroes here, no fields of blessing for the virtuous. Everyone arrives at the same destination, a vast city of dust, where the dead sit in darkness, eating clay and drinking muddy water, their voices reduced to whispers that sound like wind through dry reeds. But this is not random suffering. This is the Mesopotamian understanding of death in its starkest form. That death is the great leveler. That all human achievement and failure becomes equal in the end. That the only immortality is in the stories the living tell, and even those will eventually be forgotten when the last person who speaks that language draws their final breath. Ereshkigal rules from a palace made of shadows solidified by time. Shadows so old, they've forgotten what cast them. She did not choose this role. She was given it, assigned it, condemned to it when the gods divided the cosmos among themselves. While Inanna received the heavens with their endless variety and constant change, Ereshkigal received the underworld with its monotony and stasis. While Enlil took the air and Enki the sweet waters, Ereshkigal was given dust and darkness, and the thankless task of maintaining the boundaries between life and death. Her bitterness is not personal, but cosmic. The bitterness of someone who maintains the necessary but unglamorous infrastructure of existence. Without her, without Irkalla, the dead would have nowhere to go, would wander the earth bringing plague and madness to the living. She is the universe's necessity that no one wants to acknowledge, the fundamental requirement that everyone pretends doesn't exist until they need it. When Inanna arrived in her throne room, stripped and vulnerable, Ereshkigal did not gloat or rejoice. She simply pronounced the judgment that all who enter the land of the dead must face, death itself. Inanna was killed and hung on a hook like a piece of meat, not out of cruelty, but because that is what death is. The reduction of the complex to the simple, of the animate to the inanimate, of the someone to the something. For 3 days and 3 nights, Inanna hung there, and the world above began to die. Without the Queen of Heaven, fertility ceased. Love became impossible. The very concept of creation began to fade. This was not punishment for Inanna's death, but simple cause and effect. Certain powers are necessary for life to continue, and when they descend to death, life begins to follow. It was Enki, god of wisdom and water, who devised the solution. He created beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails, not alive but not dead, existing in the ambiguity between states. These beings could enter Irkalla without being subject to its rules, could speak to Ereshkigal not as subjects or prisoners, but as equals in suffering. They listened to her complaints, acknowledged her pain, recognized her necessity. And in that recognition, that simple acknowledgement of her suffering, Ereshkigal found enough comfort to agree to Inanna's release. But even gods cannot simply leave the underworld. Someone must take their place, maintain the balance, ensure that death's books remain properly kept. Inanna ascended, accompanied by demons called the Gala, who would not return to Irkalla without a replacement. They followed her through the cities of Sumer, and at each city the people mourned her absence, showed proper grief for their goddess's death. The Gala could not take those who mourned. But in Uruk, Inanna found her consort Dumuzi sitting on her throne, dressed in her robes, showing no sign of grief for her absence. The rage of the abandoned, the fury of the forgotten, filled her. She pointed at him and spoke the words that echo through every underworld, every mythology, every human heart that has known betrayal. Take him. The Gala seized Dumuzi, and though he fled, though his sister Geshtinana tried to hide him, though he transformed into different shapes seeking escape, eventually they dragged him to Irkalla. But Geshtinana's loyalty moved even Inanna's heart, and a compromise was reached. Dumuzi would spend half the year in the underworld, his sister the other half, each replacing the other in endless alternation. The first example of the dying and rising god motif that would echo through countless later mythologies. The dead in Irkalla exist in a state that is neither sleep nor waking, neither conscious nor unconscious. They retain their memories, but find them increasingly difficult to access, like trying to remember a dream after waking. They know who they were, but cannot quite recall why it mattered. They remember loving and being loved, but cannot recreate the feeling, only observe it from a distance, like archaeologists examining artifacts from a culture they don't understand. The demons and creatures of Irkalla are not tormentors, but functionaries, maintaining the complex bureaucracy of death that the Mesopotamians, inventors of bureaucracy itself, understood was necessary, even in the afterlife. There are scribes who record the names of the arriving dead in tablets that turn to dust before the ink dries, requiring them to write the same names over and over for eternity. There are guards who watch gates that no one tries to pass through, judges who pronounce sentences everyone already knows, servants who serve meals no one wants to eat. The Anunnaki, the old gods who preceded the current pantheon, dwell in the deepest parts of Irkalla, not dead, but dormant, not forgotten, but deliberately not remembered. They are the powers that ruled before humans invented agriculture, before cities rose from mud brick foundations, before the first temple prostitute sang the first hymn to the first named god. They wait in Irkalla with the patience of stone, knowing that even the current gods will eventually join them, that all pantheons become mythology. that all mythology becomes footnotes in books no one reads. The rivers of Irkalla are few and bitter. The Hubur runs through it, a river that is less water than liquid shadow, carrying not boats, but the dissolved essence of things that once existed, the last breath of dying languages, the final echoes of forgotten names, the ultimate dissolution of everything that ever claimed permanence. To cross the Hubur is to accept that dissolution, to acknowledge that everything you were will eventually become nothing more than sediment in the riverbed of time. Sometimes heroes have ventured here, seeking wisdom or lost loves, or simply answers to questions the living shouldn't ask. Gilgamesh came seeking his friend Enkidu, only to learn that even the greatest hero cannot wrestle death into submission, that all his strength meant nothing in a realm where strength itself is just another form of dust, waiting to settle. Enkidu himself, when briefly allowed to return as a spirit, could only report that the underworld was exactly what everyone feared: dark, dusty, and absolutely fair in its treatment of all who enter. As we prepare to leave Irkalla, to transition from this realm of ancient dust and fundamental endings, notice how the dust has changed you. You carry it now in your lungs, under your fingernails, in the corners of your eyes. It is the dust of the first death and the last. The dust that was here before creation and will remain after the heat death of the universe. The dust that contains within it every possible ending and the seeds of every possible beginning. The dust begins to swirl, forming patterns that look almost like mandala, almost like maps, almost like the dance of subatomic particles around nuclei that will not be discovered for millennia. The flatness of Irkalla begins to gain dimension, depth, complexity. The simple binary of life and death begins to multiply into countless states, countless possibilities, countless ways of existing and not existing, and existing again in different forms. We are approaching the most complex underworld of all. The one that is not a place, but a process, not a destination, but a journey that might take moments or eons depending on the weight of karma carried. The dust of Irkalla becomes the ash of cremation. The bronze gates become the doors of perception. The whispers of the Mesopotamian dead become the mantras of liberation. We descend now into Naraka, the Buddhist Hindu vision of hell that is not eternal but feels like it, that is not punishment but consequence, that is not ruled by gods but by the inexorable mathematics of cause and effect. The mathematics come first, before the geography, before the suffering, before even the awareness that you have arrived. Numbers that describe states of being, equations that calculate the weight of actions, formulas that determine how long a soul must remain in each particular configuration of consequence. This is not the arbitrary judgment of gods, but the precise working out of karmic debt, as impersonal and inevitable as gravity, as exact as the orbits of electrons around their nuclei. Naraka is not one place but many, traditionally numbered at 28, but sometimes expanded to hundreds, thousands, an infinite regression of realms within realms, each one precisely calibrated to address specific karmic imbalances. They exist simultaneously, below the earth, within the earth, parallel to the earth, and in dimensions that have no spatial relationship to anything physical. To enter Naraka is to exist in multiple states at once, experiencing different consequences on different levels of being. The architecture of Naraka follows no physical laws because it is built from consequences rather than materials. Walls are made from the accumulated weight of lies told, floors from broken promises, ceilings from the shadows cast by selfish actions. The temperature in each realm is precisely calibrated, not to maximize suffering, but to exact the specific experiential understanding necessary for the karma to be resolved. Some realms burn with fires that consume but do not destroy. Others freeze with cold that preserves consciousness, even as it eliminates everything else. Yama, the Lord of Death and Justice, presides here, but not as a ruler in the conventional sense. He is more like a cosmic accountant, tallying the debits and credits of each soul's karmic ledger with absolute precision. He has 4 arms and rides a buffalo, carries a mace and a noose, but these are symbols rather than tools. The mace represents the weight of karma, the noose, the binding nature of cause and effect, the buffalo, the slow but unstoppable approach of consequences. His palace exists in all Narakas simultaneously, a paradox of architecture that allows him to be fully present in each realm while maintaining overview of all. The palace is built from mirrors that reflect not appearances, but truths, showing each soul not who they think they are, but who their actions have made them. These mirrors cannot be avoided or deceived. They show what is, has been, and must be with crystalline clarity that makes denial impossible. The Chitragupta maintains the records, the cosmic scribe who writes with ink made from the essence of time itself, on pages that exist before they're written upon. Every action, word, and thought of every being that has ever lived is recorded here, not as judgment, but as simple fact. The records are consulted not to determine punishment, but to calculate the precise experiences necessary for each soul to understand the consequences of their choices. In Tamisra, the realm of darkness, souls who stole from others experience the absence of everything they took for granted. This is not the simple darkness of closed eyes, but the darkness of existing without the concept of light, of being conscious without the ability to perceive, of having thoughts without the framework to understand them. The souls here do not suffer in the conventional sense. They experience the pure state of lacking, of absence, of the void they created in others' lives through their taking. Raurava, the realm of the terrible, hosts those who caused terror in others. But they do not experience terror themselves. That would be too simple, too direct. Instead, they experience being terror, existing as the fear they created, conscious but dispersed through the nightmares of their victims, aware but unable to cohese into a single identity. They are the shaking hands they caused, the screams they provoked, the trauma they inflicted, experiencing it not from outside, but from within the very structure of fear itself. In Maharaurava, the greater terrible, the experience intensifies, but also deepens. Here, souls experience not just the fear they caused, but the ripple effects. The child who couldn't sleep becomes the adult who cannot trust. The moment of terror becomes a lifetime of anxiety. The single act of cruelty becomes a generational trauma passed from parent to child. The soul experiences all of this simultaneously, understanding through direct experience how a single action can echo through decades, centuries, millennia. Kumbhipaka, the realm of cooking, contains those who killed and ate conscious beings. They are not cooked themselves. Again, that would be too literal. Instead, they experience existence as food, understanding what it means to be reduced from a conscious being, mere matter for consumption. They experience the full journey from life through death to digestion, to excretion, to decomposition, conscious through all of it, understanding through direct experience the ultimate objectification they inflicted on others. The cold hells are numerous and precise in their effects. In Arbuda, the soul becomes a blister on the skin of existence, conscious but unable to act, feeling the universe move around and through them, while being completely powerless to influence anything. In Nirarbuda, the blisters burst repeatedly, each bursting a death and each reformation a birth, experiencing the cycle of existence compressed into moments that feel like eons. The measurements of time in Naraka defy comprehension. A day in the mildest hell equals 50 human years. In deeper hells, a day might equal millions or billions of years, time stretching to accommodate the amount of understanding that must be achieved. Yet these measurements are not arbitrary. They represent the actual experiential time necessary for specific karmic patterns to be fully processed and released. But Naraka is not eternal, and this is crucial to understanding its nature. It is not punishment, but purification. Not revenge, but education through experience. Every soul eventually exhausts its negative karma and moves on, either to better rebirths or, rarely, to liberation itself. The suffering is not pointless, but purposeful. Each moment precisely calibrated to generate the understanding necessary for the soul to release the patterns that brought it there. The geography of Naraka shifts according to the consciousness observing it. What appears as a lake of blood to one soul might be a desert of salt to another. Not because the place changes, but because each soul perceives through the filter of their own karma. The demons and creatures that inhabit these realms are not separate beings, but projections of the soul's own negative karma, their fears and guilts and shames given form and function. Yamaduta, the messengers of Yama, traverse all realms, guiding souls to their appropriate destinations. They are not cruel or kind, simply efficient, understanding that delay in facing consequences only compounds the eventual experience. They speak all languages simultaneously, or perhaps they speak no language and are simply understood, their communication bypassing words entirely to deliver meaning directly to consciousness. The deeper levels of Naraka contain experiences that human language cannot adequately describe. Souls experience existing as abstract concepts, being the concept of betrayal, the idea of greed, the structure of hatred. They experience time from outside time, space from outside space, causation from outside, the chain of cause and effect. These experiences are not comprehensible to embodied consciousness, but are necessary for the complete resolution of certain types of karma. In Avicii, the deepest hell, reserved for those who committed the 5 heinous crimes: killing an arhat, killing one's mother, killing one's father, wounding a Buddha, or creating schism in the spiritual community. Time becomes almost solid, each moment extending nearly infinitely, while still eventually ending. The souls here experience not just the consequences of their actions, but the full breakdown of the principles they violated. Understanding through experience why certain actions are considered particularly destructive to the fabric of existence itself. But even in Avicii, liberation is possible. The very intensity of the experience can, paradoxically, lead to sudden awakening, the soul understanding in a flash of insight the fundamental emptiness of all phenomena, including suffering itself. These moments of liberation from within the deepest hell are rare but celebrated throughout the cosmos. Proof that no state is permanent, no condition is without exit, no karma is ultimately binding. Between the various narakas exist intermediate spaces, bardos where souls rest between experiences, integrate what they've learned, prepare for what comes next. These spaces are neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, characterized mainly by a sense of pause, of breath held between exhalation and inhalation, of the moment between sleeping and waking, when identity itself is uncertain. As we prepare to leave Naraka, to complete our journey through the 7 great underworlds, notice how the mathematical precision begins to soften, how the sharp edges of consequence begin to blur into something more ambiguous. The complex calculations simplify into basic principles. The countless realms consolidate into fundamental truths. The elaborate cosmology reduces to simple understanding. Actions have consequences. Consequences create experience. Experience generates wisdom. Wisdom leads to liberation. Now, as our journey through the 7 underworlds begins its slow spiral toward completion, notice how the boundaries between realms have become less distinct, how each underworld contains echoes of all the others, how the rivers of Greek Hades flow into the frozen streams of Helheim, how the dust of Irkalla mingles with the sacred soil of the Celtic Otherworld, how the mathematics of Naraka underlies the judgment in the Egyptian Duat. The patterns emerge slowly, like constellations becoming visible as your eyes adjust to darkness. Every underworld has its river, Styx, Gjallarbru, the Nile of the Duat, Sansu, the waters of the Celtic Otherworld, Hubur, the symbolic streams of Naraka. Water, always water, the element of transition, of purification, of forgetting and remembering. These rivers are not separate waters, but one water, the primordial water that existed before creation, that will exist after dissolution, that flows through every story humans have ever told about death. Every underworld has its guardian, Cerberus with his 3 heads, Garmr with his blood-stained jaws, Amit who devours the unworthy, the demons of Yomi, the shape-shifting beings of the Celtic threshold, the Gala of Mesopotamia, the Yamaduta of Hindu cosmology. But look closer and see that these guardians are not obstacles, but guides, not preventing passage, but ensuring it happens properly at the right time in the right way. They are the universe's way of maintaining boundaries that must exist for existence itself to have meaning. Every underworld has its ruler, Hades, stern and just, Hell half living and half dead, Osiris green-skinned and eternal, Izanami corrupted yet creative, the eternal dance of the She, Ereshkigal bitter and necessary, Yama precise and impersonal. These rulers are not tyrants, but functionaries, not choosing their roles, but embodying them, each one representing a different cultural understanding of death's necessity, death's nature, death's relationship to life. The architecture of death reveals itself as consistent across all cultures. Descent is always required, whether down into the earth, across the western horizon, through the veils between worlds, or into states of consciousness that have no physical location. This descent is not about direction, but about leaving behind the familiar, the comfortable, the known. Every underworld journey is fundamentally about releasing attachment to who we think we are in order to discover who we really are. The judgment that appears in various forms across these realms, the weighing of hearts, the accounting of deeds, the natural consequences of karma, reveals itself as a single principle viewed from different angles. It is not about punishment or reward, but about truth, about facing without filters or denial the reality of who we have been, what we have done, how we have affected the great web of existence in which every action creates ripples that extend infinitely in all directions. Notice how the dead themselves are remarkably similar across all these realms. They whisper rather than speak. They hunger but cannot be satisfied. They remember but cannot quite grasp their memories. They exist in states between states, neither fully present nor fully absent. This consistency suggests that human intuition about death developed independently across cultures that had no contact with each other, touches on something fundamental, something true, something that exists beyond cultural interpretation. The promise of return, of resurrection, of rebirth appears in every tradition. Persephone's annual return, Baldr's eventual resurrection, Ra's daily rebirth, the cycle of reincarnation, the Celtic spiral of existence, Dumuzi's seasonal emergence, the eventual exhaustion of karma. Death is never presented as absolutely final. There is always movement, always change, always the possibility of transformation. Even in the grimmest underworlds, even in the deepest hells, permanence is an illusion. The relationship between the underworld and the living world proves to be not one of separation but of interdependence. The Greek underworld needs the memories of the living to give the dead identity. Helheim needs the warmth of the living world to define its cold. The Duat needs the sun's journey to maintain cosmic order. Yomi needs the purity of the living world to define its pollution. The Celtic Otherworld needs mortal time to give meaning to its timelessness. Irkalla needs the stories of the living to counter its dust and forgetfulness. Naraka needs the possibility of better rebirth to give purpose to its purifications. As the 7 underworlds blend and merge in your consciousness, they reveal themselves as 7 faces of a single mystery. 7 attempts to understand and accept the same fundamental truth, that consciousness arose from unconsciousness and will return to it, that form emerged from formlessness and will dissolve back into it, that every story has an ending that is also a beginning, that every death is also a birth, that every descent is also an ascension if viewed from the proper angle. The guardians of all 7 realms now seem to watch you with the same eyes, eyes that have seen every soul that ever lived pass through their gates, eyes that hold neither malice nor mercy, but simply recognition. They know you, not personally, but categorically, as they know every spark of consciousness that temporarily inhabits form before returning to the formless. Their watching is not judgment, but acknowledgement, a cosmic notation that you existed, that you mattered, that your brief dance through form added something unique to the eternal pattern. The rivers of all 7 underworlds flow together now, becoming a single stream that is simultaneously all waters and no water, all currents and perfect stillness. This is the river of forgetfulness and memory, of separation and connection, of ending and beginning. To drink from it is to forget everything and remember everything, to lose yourself and find yourself, to die and be born in the same swallow. And now, dear listener, as our journey through the 7 underworlds approaches its gentle conclusion, feel how the darkness has begun to soften, not brightening, but becoming less absolute. The way night softens in the hour before dawn, when the world holds its breath in anticipation of light that hasn't yet decided to arrive. The weight that has accompanied us through these realms. The weight of earth above Greek tombs, of ice above Norse graves, of sand above Egyptian sarcophagi, of earth above Japanese burial mounds, of stone above Celtic cairns, of millennia above Mesopotamian tells, of Garmr above funeral pyres. This weight begins to lift, not suddenly, but gradually, like sediment settling in still water, but in reverse. Particles of darkness rising and dispersing into something lighter than darkness, but not yet light. You have walked with Orpheus through marble halls where music could charm death itself, but learned that looking back, that desperate need to confirm what we hope is true, can destroy the very thing we seek to save. You have stood at the frozen bridge of Gjallarbru, feeling the weight of living warmth in a realm that recognizes only cold, understanding that some thresholds can be crossed only by surrendering what makes us who we think we are. You have sailed with Ra through the body of Nut, through the belly of the serpent, through the 12 hours of night that must be endured for dawn to be possible. learning that even gods must die to be reborn, that even light must accept darkness to understand its own nature. You have breathed the polluted air of Yomi, tasted the corruption that Izanami offers to all who descend, knowing that some boundaries once crossed can never be fully uncrossed, that some knowledge once gained can never be fully forgotten. You have wandered the mists of the Celtic Otherworld, where time spirals rather than arrows, where the same story happens forever and never, where beauty and terror are not opposites, but dance partners in an eternal ball that never quite begins and never quite ends. You have sat in the dust of Irkalla, that democracy of diminishment where all achievements become equal in their meaninglessness, where the only immortality is in stories that will themselves eventually turn to dust. You have experienced the mathematical precision of Naraka, where suffering is not punishment, but education, where every moment of experience is precisely calibrated to generate exactly the understanding necessary for liberation, where even the deepest hell contains within it the seed of its own transcendence. These 7 visions of death, these 7 dreams of what lies beneath and beyond and beside our waking world, they are not contradictions, but harmonies. Not different truths, but different angles of viewing the same truth. Each culture, each tradition, each human heart that has ever wondered what comes after has touched a piece of the same mystery, has added their voice to the same eternal song, has painted their portion of a picture too vast for any single perspective to encompass. The underworld journey, this descent we have taken together through the accumulated visions of millennia, reveals itself finally not as a journey to a place, but as a journey to an understanding. The underworld is not below us in any literal sense. It is within us, around us, woven into the very fabric of existence. Every moment contains death within it, just as every death contains the seeds of new life. Every breath is a small death, every exhalation a release. Every pause between heartbeats, a tiny visit to the realm of stillness that awaits us all. The ancient ones who first imagined these underworlds, who painted them on cave walls and carved them into stone, who sang them around fires that pushed back the darkness just enough to make stories possible. They knew something we have forgotten in our electric light and digital permanence. They knew that death is not the opposite of life, but its companion, not its enemy, but its teacher, not its end, but its transformation. They knew that to live fully, we must acknowledge death honestly, not with morbid fascination or paralyzing fear, but with the simple recognition that limitation gives meaning to existence, that endings make stories possible. that mortality is the price and prize of consciousness itself. The underworld journey is not about death, but about life, not about ending, but about understanding what makes beginnings possible. As the 7 underworlds fade back into the mythology from which they emerged, as the guardians return to their eternal vigils, as the rivers resume their separate courses, as the rulers settle back onto their thrones of shadow and necessity, something remains with you. Not fear, not sadness, not the chill of the grave or the heat of judgment, but something simpler and more profound, the knowledge that you have looked into the face of the ultimate mystery and found there not horror, but recognition, not alienation, but homecoming. For we all carry within us our own underworld, our own realm of shadows and memories, regrets and reconciliations. We all have our own rivers to cross, our own guardians to face, our own judgments to undergo. The mythologies we have explored tonight are not fantasies, but maps, not entertainments, but instructions, not stories about death, but manuals for living with the awareness that life is precious, precisely because it is not permanent. Listen now to how the darkness around you has changed through our journey. It is no longer the simple absence of light, but something richer, fuller, pregnant with possibility. It is the darkness of closed eyes that will open, of seeds that will sprout, of stories that are gathering themselves to be told. It is the darkness that makes light visible, that makes stars possible, that makes dawn miraculous rather than mechanical. Your breathing has found the rhythm of deep sleep, that state where consciousness releases its grip on identity and allows something larger to dream through it. This is its own journey to an underworld, this nightly descent into dreams where the rules of waking life don't apply, where the dead can speak and the living can fly, where time moves in circles and meaning comes in symbols rather than words. Soon, very soon now, you will cross fully into that realm of sleep, carrying with you the images and insights of our journey. Perhaps you will dream of rivers that flow in all directions at once, of guardians who are also guides, of judgments that are also liberations. Perhaps you will find yourself in your own underworld, facing your own shadows, discovering your own light. But know this, as consciousness fades into dream, as waking yields to sleeping, as the journey through story becomes the journey through your own inner landscape, you are not alone in this descent. Every human who has ever lived has made this journey, this nightly practice for the final journey, this small death that makes tomorrow possible. We are all, always, together in the darkness, connected by the simple fact of our mortality, united in our journey toward the same mysterious destination. The old stories tell us that dawn always comes, that the sun always rises from its underworld journey, that spring always follows winter, that life always finds a way to continue, despite death's certainty. This is not naive optimism, but observed truth. The pattern that underlies all patterns, the story that contains all stories. Darkness is not the end of light, but its womb. Death is not the opposite of life, but its mother. The underworld is not our destination, but our origin and our return. As the last words of our journey dissolve into the silence that contains all words, as the stories of 7 underworlds settle into your bones and blood and dreams, remember this. You have been on a hero's journey tonight, a descent and return, a death and rebirth. You have faced the ultimate mystery and survived as humans always have. Through the simple act of telling stories about it, of weaving meaning from mystery, of creating light from the acknowledgement of darkness. Sleep now, dear traveler, knowing that your dreams are gateways to your own underworld, your own place of transformation, your own realm where the impossible becomes possible, and the possible becomes irrelevant. Sleep knowing that you will wake, as Ra wakes, as Persephone returns, as the heroes emerge from their underworld journeys, carrying treasures that can exist nowhere else but in the darkness below. Sleep, and in sleeping, remember what the waking world makes you forget: that you are eternal and temporary, that you are individual and universal, that you are the dreamer and the dream, the story and its telling, the journey and its destination. The underworld waits, patient as stone, certain as gravity, gentle as darkness. It has always been waiting, will always be waiting, holding space for every soul's eventual arrival, every consciousness's return to the source from which it emerged. But not tonight, not yet, not while there are still dreams to dream and stories to tell, and breaths to breathe in this sweet, temporary, precious world above. Rest now in the darkness that is not empty but full, in the silence that is not absent but present, in the sleep that is not unconsciousness but a different kind of knowing. The 7 underworlds fade back into myth, back into symbol, back into the collective unconscious from which all stories spring and to which all stories return. But they remain, always, just beneath the surface of waking life, just beyond the edge of ordinary perception, just past the threshold of everyday awareness. They remain in every shadow, every cave, every moment of transition between one state and another. They remain, most of all, in the stories we tell ourselves about what death means, what life means, what it means to be conscious in a universe that existed before consciousness and will exist after it. The journey ends where it began, in darkness, in silence, in the space between breaths, where everything is possible and nothing is required. The 7 underworlds spiral through your dreams now, not as separate places, but as facets of a single crystal, reflecting and refracting the light of consciousness into patterns too beautiful and terrible and true for waking eyes to perceive. Sleep now, and let the stories settle into your depths like sediment in still water, like seeds in dark earth, like stars in the vast darkness of space. Let them work their slow magic in the underworld of your unconscious, transforming fear into understanding, mystery into meaning, darkness into the deepest, most restful, most healing sleep. The underworld journey is complete, but it is also eternal, happening always, in every moment of ending that is also beginning, in every death that is also birth, in every descent that is also ascension. You have been to the underworld tonight, all 7 of them, all at once, and you have returned, as heroes always return, changed by the journey, carrying within you now the knowledge that death has revealed its secret. It was always, only, ever another face of life. As silence finally claims the last echo of these words, as even the memory of sound fades into the perfect quiet of deep sleep, the underworld smiles its ancient smile, knowing that another soul has made the journey, has faced the mystery, has discovered the truth that has always been hidden in plain sight, that we are all, always, already home. And in that homecoming, in that recognition, in that final release of the need to be anywhere other than where we are, the deepest sleep becomes possible. The most complete rest arrives, and consciousness releases into the darkness that is not death, but the space between lives, between breaths, between one story ending and another waiting to begin. Sleep now, sleep, and remember, in dreams deeper than memory, older than words, truer than waking, that you have always known the way through the underworld, because you have always carried it within you, because you are yourself, the bridge between worlds, the threshold between states, the eternal traveler who journeys not to arrive, but to understand that every arrival is just another departure, every ending just another beginning, every death just another doorway in the endless mansion of existence. The 7 underworlds spiral into one. The one dissolves into none. And in that dissolution, that perfect release, that absolute letting go, the deepest healing happens. The most profound rest arrives, and you discover what the ancient ones always knew, that the underworld is not a place of death, but the source of life. Not the end of the journey, but its beginning and middle and end, all at once, all always, all forever, in the eternal now of perfect, dreamless, healing sleep.